Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about pragmatic masters. So let's get into it. So the question in question was posted on an old video I made, which was called as much as "Is programming passion shown in the code?" Hi Frederick, I have a follow-up question. You mentioned that finding a pragmatic master is really hard, but if someone is a pragmatic master, how do they make themselves findable and how do they stand out from the crowd? That is very easy. It's uh, it, it's easy to stand out as a pragmatic master, usually at the very least. Like you stand, trust me when I say this, if I do the interview, you will stand out like fireworks because I know what the norm is. I've done well over 100 interviews now over the course of my career, and I can tell you what the norm sounds like. And I can tell you that on my 5 fingers, I can count how many times I've talked to a true master of software development, or like a real pragmatic master, in my opinion, at the very least. Like a true senior software developer with all of that sort of stuff, right? So the sad part is that it's very difficult for you to stand out as a pragmatic master during like an evaluation, like on your CV or something like that, because the pragmatic master, I argue, you identify them when you talk to them and you hear their reasoning and things like that. And that brings the next problem, which is that if you have an interviewer who doesn't know what a true master of the craft sounds like, it won't matter. It won't matter that you are the best of the best, because the mismatch is not in that you are really good, it is that the evaluator doesn't know what the true master sounds like or what experiences that they will have. However, if you do work with people or you're interviewed by people who really know their stuff and who have a good understanding of how usually like average seniors or average mid-levels and like people how they usually reason and the problems that come with that, they will usually hear the way based on the way that you express yourself if you are a master or not. Now, to give you a very concrete example of this, so what I argue is that a true pragmatic master is an individual who has a very, what I call, mature mindset around the code that they write. It's a little bit like, imagine if you ask what's the most important thing in life to someone who's 5 years old, someone who's 20 years old, and someone who might be 50 or 60 or so forth and so forth, what their perspective on that question is. Depending on who you ask, they will give you very different types of perspectives. And it's usually the same thing when you talk to a true master of the craft, because the average software developer, when you ask them about the tools that they use or the technologies that they're running or how they're doing things or so forth within their teams and so forth, there's usually two types of answers. You have the people who are philosophers or so forth, and they will give you a basic, the core of the answer is always because it's cool or it's trendy, or I read that on a newsletter or something like it. That's what Google is doing or something. That is their general answer. The other type is the type who only knows one or two tools. Like they actually don't keep a track of anything in IT. This is just a job to them, and the tools that they know are a direct reflection of what they've done in their previous roles. So they will not really reflect so much about the choices that they have made, because to them it's the only choice. Whereas the first version, it is the choice that they like, not because it makes any sense, right? Like that is regardless of it doesn't play in, right? But the true pragmatic master will give you an answer where they have considered what's going to be best for the team, what's going to be best for the company, and the overall technical solutions that they're going to work on. But basically, they know the cool tools. They know all the various ways that things work in a company. So in essence, it's the person who has both the perspectives of both of these two people. It's the individual who knows what's trendy and what the benefits are with the coolest tools or the latest tools, and they also know how generally people in the organization work and what they can expect from their coworkers. That's the thing that the philosophers usually don't understand, and that's where I argue that the realm of failed gurus and these thought leaders that just give you bullshit that never works and hype and stuff like that. These are individuals, and I argue that this is the greatest curse of being truly talented as a guru or whatever you might be, right? If you cannot create a solution that is approachable for people of the other category who are just doing this as a job, you are doomed to create legacy for the system, because the only person who can work on the code is you and not all the other people. And if you that's just not something that is sustainable for an IT company. It might be for like a simple library author or something like that, but for a company, that is not a good investment, because you're going to end up with one or two people who know how the system works, and then when it comes in the hands of the regular people who just do this 9 to 5 thing, they're going to fuck it up, and you're going to end up with legacy code, just as you would have if people who don't really care did all the work. Now, the pragmatic master, when you ask them why they pick a certain stack or why they should just a certain tool or something like that, what they will usually say, like an example of a statement that that will get like all my bells ringing immediately, is if you say something like, well, privately in my own projects, I really like to use, it doesn't matter what it is, it can be Rust or something like that. Let's take Rust as an example. But I also know that it might be a bit much to expect all of my coworkers and so forth, because we are different, right? Some people are really passionate and some people are not so passionate, and so Rust is a little bit of a tough learning curve for a new project, for people who joins a new project, and it's unlikely that we're going to be able to find a lot of people for that specific stack, so it's a bit of a risk to do that. So on average, unless I'm doing something really specific, I go with something like C# or Java or so forth. But I try to make sure that if I'm building something more advanced or something like that, then we of course consider that. But unless we have something specific where it makes a lot of sense to sort of take the hit to learning and risk and hiring and stuff like that, then we don't do it, because it's not necessary, because our goal is to deliver business value, not necessarily to use my favorite stack. That is, I argue, a pragmatic master. It is the answer of someone who is truly mature. It's someone who has achieved wisdom, who understands that there are many ways of solving problems and there are a lot of tools that make a lot of sense in certain situations. But if you don't know the people you're going to work with, and usually what you can expect from the average person who's going to work on a project, and you know what the business requirements are and sort of what the company's going for and stuff like that, and you've already settled, as I like to say, you're putting the cart before the horse. Like, you're not problem oriented, you're tool oriented. You've already made a decision on what is the coolest thing or the best thing or so forth and so forth, or you don't know of any other way of doing it, so you don't actually investigate or look into anything, so you can't really make an informed decision. The pragmatic master has both these perspectives in mind at all times, so that when they come up with a solution, it is usually the solution that will be in the sweet spot for the company. For a company who needs a really high performance solution, or like super bells and whistles and stuff like that, they will lean more towards the cooler and trendier tools, assuming that those tools fill the requirement, but they won't just pick them because it's cool. And the same thing goes for the other perspective. They won't push a stack or a setup that they know will not scale, because they have, say, tons of juniors, or they have people who are like from various backgrounds. Some of them are really good and some of them are not, and so forth. Because as I said, it doesn't matter what you build in what tech stack you're using. If nobody knows how to use it, you're still going to end up with a shit system. That is what the pragmatic master truly understands. They know everything about their craft. They know how to make good decisions and so forth, and they consider the impact of their choices on their coworkers and the end system. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that you find the pragmatic master is interviews, personal interviews, and they have to be done by people who really understand as I said, like that software, like they've grown out of the junior stage and grown out of the philosopher stage. They have an understanding of up-to-date practices, modern tools, and they have an understanding of the ecosystem, and they are not complacent and stuff like that. Basically, you need to have people in the interview who really know what the common weaknesses of software developers are, what's trendy, what's not trendy, sort of that. Because the problem is that if you don't know these things, when someone starts babbling, like let's say a charismatic person or someone like myself who can talk and speak my mind and so forth in a tone of voice that sounds very confident. Imagine if you heard me speak now, guys, and I started techno babbling like, nobody does microservices anymore. It's all about reactive programming or so forth. Like, I can make things sound really feasible. So to an engineering manager who may not know what actually is true and what is not true, it's all going to sound the same. I'm going to most likely be able to convince them all kinds of stuff based on the fact that I can use mannerisms that makes them believe me because they don't have the knowledge. So in other words, when you are interviewing and you want to find a pragmatic master, you have to have someone who really knows their shit in the conversation. It has to be an individual who has been in the industry long enough to know what usually happens if you, for example, don't have test coverage, or you don't force people to do unit testing. Like, they have been in the industry so long that they sort of know the common problems that teams have and what happens when you allow someone who is a little bit too opinionated to take control. And it has to be an individual who also knows what's relevant and what's not relevant. They need to know the craft. In essence, I'm not going to say that you have to have a pragmatic master to find a pragmatic master, but you at least have to have an individual who has enough seniority to tell when a person motivates the reasons why they make a certain choice with the whole picture in mind. That's the sort of person that you're looking for. That's usually what the pragmatic master is all about. It's the individual who knows everything and picks exactly the right option based on the constraints that they have, the coworkers they have, and the business value they are supposed to deliver. Have a great day.